Jon Land for BookTrib on Facebook Live. And are we in for a treat today? Because we have with us my good friend, my very good friend, Reavis Wortham. And I'll tell you, he has got a great, an absolutely great new book out. It's called The Rock Hole. And it is outstanding. And actually, I just looked at the press release, which answered one of my questions. But there's something unusual in this book. There's an introduction from a fellow fiction author, and I would like to read you part of the introduction written by the great Jon Lansdale. Now and again, you come across a book, an author, that has something beyond a good story to tell, something outside of filling a few hours of reading time. Certain authors can make you feel something else in their stories beyond plot. They have experience, and they can draw on that experience and feed it into their work, stuff it with authenticity. That's The Rock Hole by Reavis Wortham. High praise indeed. Now, Reavis, I was really intrigued and interested to see that The Rock Hole was inspired by your grandfather, who was a Lamar County constable. Now, you mentioned the characters and incident are works of fiction, but the setting of Lamar County in North Texas is very real. The names of several locations have been changed, but Rock Hole exists, as does Sanders Creek, Center Springs. In other words, we've got a real sense of place here. Now, I've got to tell you a little confession. I have never based a character ever on someone that I knew. What was it about your grandfather that inspired you to write The Rock Hole? Why base a character on him? Talk about your grandfather and the qualities that he had in him that made you, after all these years, want to write about essentially him, because the character, our hero, Grandpa Ned, is basically the grandpa of Reavis.
That's absolutely true. And John's good to be here with you. Thank you so much. And thanks to BookTrib for having me on. I started writing newspaper columns back in 1988. To date, I have over 2,000 magazine articles and newspaper columns here in Texas, and I'm still writing them weekly in several papers in Texas. And as I was writing these newspaper columns, they came from my younger days growing up, partially in Lamar County, out in the country with my granddad. And he was a heavy influence on my raising, as we say down here in Texas. He was one of those tough old lawmen that you didn't want to cross if you were a bad guy. It was a serious mistake if you crossed him. He became constable back in the early 1940s and retired in about 1985. And during those years, I would watch him do his job. He was a farmer. A lot of those constables back in those days, they farmed, they raised cows, they were on a tractor, and then he would come in and take off his overalls, put on a badge, and he would go out and enforce the law in the little town called Chicota, Texas. And I rode with him a lot. If we have time, let me tell you about an actual murder he and I walked in on. So when I was about 8 years old, or murder scene anyway. But I watched Granddad and I listened to him, and he was such the word hero is overused these days, but to me, he was the ultimate hero. And I would go up to this old country store that in Chicota, Texas, where all the old men gathered. The old men, I thought of as old guys. They were younger than I am today. Those were the old men. And back in those days, in the early 1960s, kids were seen but not heard. So we would go to the store. He would get up onto the overhang with all the spit and whittle club that would do to the farmers that were retired or just wanted to gather and talk. And they would talk about crops. They would talk about, politics, the lay of the land, the weather. And I was sitting at their feet, usually with an RC cola and peanuts or something, and listening and eating. And I heard stories that these old guys told, and they were fascinating stories. And after a while, they would forget this kid is sitting there. And so the stories would get a little more detailed and a little edgier. And in those years around 1964, there was something going on in the river bottoms of Lamar County. they were finding mutilated animals that were horribly abused, and dead animals, and each animal they found got a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. And my granddad was working on this case as whatever case he had, and this continued on for several months. And I was listening to him and watching them. The old men, some of them started carrying pistols on their hips, not in their pockets. Back then, everybody had a gun in the truck or a pistol on them, as my granddad did. But I was hearing these stories, and then they found a body up on the river, and they were wondering if the body was connected. What we know today, and what I suspect, no one ever told me the truth, but what I suspect, we had a budding serial killer in that area, learning his craft. And so I watched them and I listened to them, and I was with him a lot of times. And my granddad was very black and white. He was one of those guys. There was right or wrong, and that's how he handled things. Well, years passed. I was grown. I was married. We were sitting on the porch about a year before he died, looking at his cows out across the pasture. That was his entertainment. You know, he couldn't get around much anymore. And watching the cows. I'd like to do that today. Yeah, of course, I'm older than he was, but we're sitting there talking, and I remember that story about what was going on. And I asked him, I said, did you guys, and I related all the events in a lot more graphic detail than I've told you. A lot of it's in the Rockholden book. But I said, did you guys ever catch who was doing it? Did you ever find out who was doing it? And Granddad, he looked at, his head kind of snapped around at me, and he looked back out at his cows, and he looked back at me again. And he had these cold blue eyes that were just ice. And he looked at me, and without answering my question in any way other than to say, well, son, sometimes some folks just need killing. And that was all he said. And he never said anything about it again to me. And I had to ponder that he spoke volumes in that one sentence. And I had to ponder what had happened. And I began to wonder, not long after that, did they catch the guy? Did the guy get killed? Those old farmers up there, they survived the Depression. They were World War II veterans. They were Korean War veterans. And I wondered, did some of these old guys up here actually take the law into their own hands and find this guy and put him in a shallow grave somewhere down the Red River bottoms? That is the seed that became the Rockhole. And I based it on Granddad because I loved his values. I loved him. I love that country. I know that country. And I write about what I know. John, I wouldn't write about your part of the world to save my life because I've been there, but I don't understand it. I don't know your language up there. We have a specific language down here. We have the way we talk is different than anyone else. And so, if I'll say a barbed wire fence, everybody would look at me like I'd lost my mind because it's a barbed wire fence. These are the things that we say, we talk about. It's the language of my region. And I use the language of Texas in my region in all of my books. And I think that gives them the flavor that people enjoy, that they enjoy reading, so they can see this guy grew up there. I was there. I fished the Rockhole. I walked those river bottoms. My granddad, I followed him one day. He would get calls on his car radio. We'd just be out driving around. He'd go check fences and stuff. And he got a call. He said, you need to come up to this house in a little town called Arthur City, just 5 miles away. When we pull up to the house at Arthur City, my granddad gets out. We were in his truck. No, we were in his car. And I got out, and there are 3 deputy sheriff cars there. The sheriff is there. There's an ambulance there, the kind of ambulance that they had back in those days, which was a station wagon from the funeral home, Mm-hmm. And Granddad, as I said, he often forgot I was there. And so they said, well, it's inside the house. And he walked up on this little porch, a little shotgun house. I walked in behind him. We stepped into the living room, and it was literally dripping in blood on the ceiling and the walls. Someone had taken an axe to someone else in that house. And I'm like 8 or 9 years old. And I took one step in, and I looked at that, and then he realized I was there. He just took this giant hand of his and just slapped me right back out the door. But I think that kind of those little nuggets like that wind up in the book, and that's where a lot of the inspiration for a lot of what I write.
And so much of that is captured, and the book is centered, not just centered around, but is dominated by Grandpa Ned, who is the basis of your grandfather.
Yes.
And obviously he is inspired. He's based upon, he's inspired by whatever terminology you want to use. But tell me something about your character, Grandpa Ned, that is different about your real grandfather. Tell me something that where Grandpa Ned diverted from the character on which he was based.
I can do that. To my knowledge, he never actually shot anyone. He pulled his gun a few times. There's a scene in the rock hole where this is a true scene. My granddad pulled a car over with 4 guys out of it, in it. And when he opened his door, they all came out with weapons. And he pulled this little revolver, little 38 he carried, and he cocked it and he pointed it at the driver. And very calmly, this is the story I got. He said, "I am about to shoot you first, and I'm going to start shooting everybody else that's standing around here. And you will all be dead. I will be alive if you don't put those weapons down right now." And everything just dropped to the ground. So that was my granddad. But Ned Parker in the rock hole, he walks a fine line, which I created for him just for the excitement value. Ned Parker always walks on the edge of good and bad. Sometimes he slips over into the right side of wrong, something that absolutely has to be done. So Ned will go farther than my granddad ever did. As the Texas Red River series advances, there's a lot of there's gunplay and all of it. There are things that my granddad never knew. He didn't understand investigative skills to a great extent. So I kind of misspoke on it. He understood investigative skills. He wasn't trained in it. Everything he did, he learned. And so the Ned Parker in all of these books will just advance a little bit farther than my grandfather ever.
You know, to give you the greatest compliment I can give you, the only character, and I review a lot of books. I read far too much. And the only character I've ever encountered who reminded me or really resonated with me the same way that Grandpa Ned resonated with me was Hackberry Holland, the old Texas Ranger in Billy Bob Thornton's Holland Family Saga, which is the books he rotates with the Roby Show novels. And to my knowledge, and I'm probably wrong about this, but maybe you're not the only 2 people writing about octogenarian heroes, but you're the only 2 people doing it as well as you are. Talk about the specific challenge of writing about a character in their 6th, 7th, even in some cases, not in this case, but eventually maybe even their 8th decades. What is different? Because Sonny Hawk in your other series is hardly what you would call an older person, whereas Hackberry Holland from the James Lee Burke books and Grandpa Ned from the first in your new series are. Talk about writing an older character.
It's easy for me as I get older to write older characters because I'm using a lot of my own, on issues or way of thinking. I have a friend of mine. He is 10 years older than I'm 66 years old. And he told me when he turned 50 years old, he said, "Rev, when you hit 50, I'm going to tell you something. Every time morning when you get up, something different is going to hurt." So, and I'm finding that is true. So I don't find challenges. I think older people are just reservoirs of knowledge and information that we don't tap enough. They've had life experiences. They've done things that if you're sitting around talking and it gets really late at night, you're sitting around a campfire, they may tell you a story that they've been involved in of something they've done. It's just completely out of character. And so these are the things that I like to bring in. And I'm so honored that you mentioned me in with Mr. James Lee Burke, and his Hackberry stuff. I had the opportunity and the honor to interview Mr. Burke about a year ago.
Wow.
It was just a wonderful interview. So thank you so much for that. But I have older characters. I try to spin my stories so that you can see them from various viewpoints. I break rules in my books, as you well know. I will go from first person in one chapter to third person in another chapter to give you different viewpoints. In the Rock Hole series and the Red River series, we see we see life through Ned Parker, who is getting ready to retire. He's an older guy. He's got a pot belly. He aches when he gets up in the morning. But you also see it from another level from his nephew, who is much younger, Cody Parker. So you see it in Cody's. These take place in 1964, folks. So they're historical I call them historical mystery thrillers. That's the only way I can describe what I write. So in 1964, historical mystery thrillers. Let's get all of it in there. Yeah. In fact, just not too long ago, I wrote a historical Western horror book manuscript that we're going to try and sell here. So yeah, I'm all over the page. But with the Red River series, Cody Parker is just back from Vietnam. Now, a lot of folks don't think about Vietnam in 1964, but we were there. Yep. We were already in country. And so Cody's been there and he comes back. Now, this is a small town boy who's been to Vietnam and seen war. Now he comes back and he's viewing 1964 through his eyes. And then the third level is watching through the children's eyes. They're a 10-year-old boy and a 10-year-old girl. They're cousins. They're almost twins. They're so close together. And so you see the world from those child's eyes, which was my child's eyes. And I was 10 years old in 1964. So you get to see all the world through various lenses. And I think that helps advance the books even farther. Now, I don't know if you've ever met a wonderful writer who just recently passed away. It's terrible we lost him. His name was Jan Reed. I don't know if you knew Jan. No. Outstanding writer. And Jan, I met him. Oh, I've got stories about Jan Reed and I that I didn't even know the guy, but we have stories that interlock together. But Jan was about 10 years, about 5 years older than I am, I think. And he wrote me a note one day. He just read one of my Red River books. And he said, your old guys are the spryest old guys I've ever seen. He says, they do things that I don't know how they can do. But, the old men that I grew up with, they were farmers. They were active and they were pretty doggone spry until they finally ran out. So I want my old guys to do it. There's a character that comes up way later in the series, about third or fourth book in the Red River series. His name's Tom Bell, retired Texas Ranger. And Tom Bell is somewhere, we've never identified how old he is. He's somewhere between 70 and 130 years old. We don't know, but he's just a tough old lawman, retired Ranger. And I had so many comments. He was a throwaway character in a book. I had so many comments that I had to bring him back and include him in the rest of the Red River books. And in fact, I just finished a manuscript that's going to my publisher within about a month, and it's titled Tom Bell. And we'll go back to 1931, and you see that ranger dealing with the trouble in the East Texas oil fields.
The oil boom.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And see,
Lone Wolf Gonzalez and Kilgore.
Exactly, and that's where it takes place. I took Kilgore.
Okay, there we go.
There we go. I renamed it, and now we've got all of that. And how many people have written about the oil boom in fiction in Kilgore back in the 1930s? I don't think very many people have.
No, surprisingly few.
Yeah. So I'm tapping into that world too. So I hope that answers your question about my spry old men.
It not only does it, but I want to talk about the sense of place, the sense of Texas, the sense of the vistas, the wide open expanse, the frontier that's never gone away in parts of Texas. You mentioned that you have a character named Tom Bell. Well, the hero, if you want to call him that, of No Country for Old Men, played by Tommy Lee Jones in the movie, was Ed Tom Bell. And when I think about pop culture references for people watching us BookTrib on Facebook Live today, when I think about pop culture, I see movies in my mind when I write and when I read. And what I saw in the Rock Hole was I saw some No Country for Old Men. And I saw a lot of True Detective season 1. And the Nick Fuji, I can't pronounce his last name, but he's also a novelist, as is Noah Farley, who writes Fargo. And you can tell when a novelist is writing a TV show because they do the things that we do. But your use of place, your use of small town Americana, a world that in this case is kind of frozen in time, where there are still, where you have where a constable is the law. But talk about the sense of place. We mentioned James Lee Burke before. We're both huge admirers and fans of his. Nobody has a greater sense of place than he does. Yours is more subtle. Yours is not as hits you in the face, but it's so prevalent, almost like the setting becomes a character in itself. Talk about that.
You keep throwing these big names of these big writers at me and using them in the same sentence as my work, and I'm going to need a bigger hat. Now I'm telling you, my hat's going to swell
You
up.
should be wearing that hat today. Here we go. Now I'm happy. Yeah, right.
Is that
Reavis Worth.
There you go.
Now I feel we're back in New York.
Yeah, we are. We're back having fun again together. The truth is that you nailed it, John. The world that I write about is a character. It becomes a character unto itself. And I write about the sense of place that I absolutely love. And I want people to I don't want to beat you up with the details. I want the details to be part of the story. And so, I'm not going to give you 3 or 4 paragraphs or 5 paragraphs or 3 or 4 pages about the world around the characters as they're talking. That world, it kind of bleeds in. When you're cooking, you're cooking something on the stove. You add these ingredients, and you add those ingredients, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and that gives the pot the flavor that you're anticipating. And that's what happens in the rock hole. You'll get mentions of the land and the country and the way people talk. But at the same time, I've got something else I throw into all of my books, and I don't know if anyone notices, but weather is always a character in my book. The weather becomes part of the book, and that helps drive the story also. So when I'm talking about the river bottoms or East Texas or the creek bottoms or the farmland out there, I'm talking about something that I've been on. I've walked it. I'm around it. And again, Jon Land, a good friend of mine, he wrote that introduction. One day, he and I were talking. We were on a panel together, and we were describing East Texas, and he said, East Texas, and we call that behind the pine curtain. It's all piney woods back over in there where he lives. But he said East Texas and Northeast Texas is a world of water. It rains a lot. We have springs, we have rivers out in there. It's a world of water, and so that becomes a character also in the books. And if I have 2 characters walking along, talking or riding around or doing something, I don't consciously add the detail in there that makes. I just will write about what I'm seeing, and then that arises in the book. And truthfully, it's like when I write, I don't plot, I don't outline. I have no idea where I'm going. I just put my fingers on the keyboard, and it's like John, you're writing the story and it's coming up on my screen. I follow it all the way through, which is kind of funny because when I wrote the climax to the rock hall, I didn't know who the bad guy was until the last moment. I thought it was someone else. And then the killer's revealed, and I'm going, I didn't really? Oh, what a shock that is to me. And so that's how it all works. It's one big package that wraps up. But a lot of that is unconscious. It just comes to me. It comes through my fingertips, and it's there.
It's very natural in the sense that if you have a character who's describing heat lightning and clouds that are gathering on the horizon, you do this a lot, which is a good thing. It symbolizes the storm that is coming, not the physical storm, and that's what you do so well.
Oh, thank you.
That's what, that there is and I think that, I hadn't thought about the weather as a character, but I think the weather as a character is kind of coming with the evil or that is already there. And the darker it gets metaphorically and that metaphor plays out, the literal and the figurative, become one, which, we're talking about this. I noted you're an organic writer. You write from the inside out as opposed to the outside in. But there is a marked distinction in the tone of the language between the rock hole. Obviously, this is the first in a series, so I have nothing to compare it to. Besides the Sunny Hawk series, your Texas Ranger series,
yes,
which are not written exactly the same way at all. The tone is different. The language is different. The situations are different. Was this a conscious decision on your part to change your style when you moved into this new series, or was it something that evolved through the eyes of the characters?
It was subconscious. I had no earthly idea that I was doing it until
But you see it now, right?
I see it now. And I think that's because it's a different part of Texas.
Oh, okay, there you go.
And Texas is enormous. People don't realize how big Texas is. It takes you all day to drive from one side to the other, and more than that sometimes. If somebody asks us how many miles away something is, I don't have any idea how many miles. I know how many hours it takes to get there, and that's how we describe the distance out here. And so my agent wanted me to try to write. She said, I would like for you to write some thrillers. And I said, I've never written a thriller. She goes, well, give it a shot. So I created Sunny Hawk and positioned most of that series out in the Big Bend region of Texas, which is West Texas. We have 5 geographical regions in the state. West Texas is dry, it's arid, it's the desert. And the people out there, God love them, they're Texans, they're my people, but they're not the same as East Texas people. They don't speak the same as East Texas people. We may say we've just had rain here for days, and we had frog stranglers. We had just tropical downpours. And if I explained that to you like that, you would understand it. We got 5 inches of rain. Everybody understands that. Out in West Texas, if I was out there talking to some of those cowboys out there in the diners, and I'd say, how much rain did you get? Well, we got a little moisture the other day. It's the tonality. It's the way we speak. They're completely different. And so when I went out there and I created a thriller series, thrillers to me, they're fast. They're streamlined. David Morrell, David.
Yes, the professor.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sorry?
A master of our craft.
He is a master of our craft, and he inspired me to write. We can talk about that later if we have time, but he was a mentor. He didn't even know it. But he and I were talking, and we were doing an interview together on a panel, and someone said, describe what a thriller is. One of those off-the-cuff jobs. And Rev, what do you think a thriller is? I said, well, I think a thriller is a mystery is, compare the two. A mystery is you go through the details, you unfold it, you unwrap it, you take the layers off of the onion until you find out, the climax arises, and then you find out who's been driving the bus. With thrillers, I know who's driving the bus. We're going to ride this roller coaster, and we're going to ride it out to see, hopefully, that the bad guy and the bad guy's driving the bus. We want to see him get what is due to him at the end. So that's how I describe a thriller. And I wanted to be fast paced. I wanted to be roller coaster rides. I wanted to write something that people would pick up and enjoy, but they won't want to put it down. They just want to drive through and read up into the night. And one of the techniques I have when I do that also is my chapters are short. They're snappy chapters. And the closer you get to the climax, we're looking at various things with people's eyes. I mean, a chapter, maybe 2 paragraphs, maybe 1 paragraph. Mm-hmm. And that's, I've got to fish. I love to fish. And at that point, I've got a fish hook in the reader, because the reader said, well, I want 1 more page. It's a quick chapter, 1 more page. I don't know how many times you've been sitting in a chair or in bed, you're reading, and you thought, I'm kind of tired, and you flip through to see how many more pages are in that chapter. Well, I'm going to read to the end of that chapter. And you do that. Mine, it's 1 page, 3 pages, 5 pages. So you rush through. My Sunny Hawk thrillers are like that. Someone described it. I didn't unconsciously. I wrote the first Sunny Hawk, Hawk's Prey. They said it was Die Hard in West Texas, and I never even thought about that. But you know how fast Die Hard is.
Sure.
It doesn't slow down. You don't get a breath. And that's what the Sunny Hawks are. And that's how they're designed to just drive that roller coaster ride to the end, so that you see what happens to the bad guy. And my bad guys, they always get what they deserve.
It seems like, pacing wise, though, I'd say that all that applies as far, maybe the stakes are different in the Rock Hall, mm-hmm. but they're more personal, more contained, mm-hmm. almost claustrophobic in some respects. But I found the pacing itself, the cliffhangers, the chapters moving from one to the other, I found that very similar, which is a compliment.
Well,
I think that's your style. Talk about, I was going to ask you another question, but we're running out of time. So I thought it would be good to end on the whole notion of the Texas lawman. There's no other place in the country where you could still write a book like this, even though, even though it's a period piece, even though it's set in 1964. We forget that at times. But you are honoring a tradition in this book when you do that. You are honoring the tradition of the small town Texas lawman, which is different than any other character because, and you don't see it in other states. I mean, I can throw, if I walk out my door right now and drive a mile, I'm going to see 3 cops. A couple of them be on construction details, but I'm going to see 3 cops. And if I drive 5 miles, I'm going to see 10 cops. That's not true where you're writing about it. That's not true where you are. Talk about the tradition of the Texas lawman in what you're doing and literature in general.
Well, thank you. And we are talking in the Red River series about the early 1960s, and so you have the sheriff's departments in the towns themselves, but in Texas, towns are separated by about 20 miles apiece, and that's how far back in the old days you could drive a team and a wagon in a day. So most of our towns are paced out about 20 miles apart, but you have the sheriff's department in some of them. Some of these little towns, you didn't have a sheriff's department. That's where the constable's job came in. They were that branch of the law that you could pick up a telephone on your party line. Did you have party lines, or you even know what?
No, I've never been on a party line.
Oh, but we were on a party line, and out in the country, you could have 2 or 3 people on the same line, and so the phone would ring in your house, about ring twice, but if it rings 3 times, that's for Miss Ethel down the farther down. And so that was the early grapevine, and you always knew when the phone rang and it was for my granddad because he was a lawman, and so it would ring. He would pick it up, or my grandmother would pick it up, and you could hear the receiver come up way down the line, and somebody's listening in. It's like, I want to hear what's going on.
That's something.
So we had party lines like that, and we had the people that would call my granddad, and so he's out there by himself, and he deals with the things he needs to deal with. And you're right, you can drive some places here in the state of Texas. You can drive for 2 or 3 hours and not see a law enforcement officer. I just came back in from Northeast Texas, Red River County, which is right next to the Rockhold County of Lamar County. I was up there hunting with a retired constable who actually was the constable in the precinct next to my granddad's. He didn't know him, but he took over for he became constable precinct 2 over there. And we were out there talking. He was once get a highway patrol officer out in West Texas. He said he would get calls out there. Someone had a wreck and they needed him to get there. He said he was so far away, sometimes it would take him an hour to drive to the scene of the accident. That's how big it is out there. And smaller towns, we have more law enforcement officers back in those days. And you didn't, for the most part, you didn't even know they were constables because they were riding. Granddad rode around in a 1948 pickup truck sometimes with his badge on, and then he finally got an official police car, and which was a Plymouth Fury, and they gave him a radio. He was so excited. He had a radio in his car. He didn't have to get phone calls and stuff. So those guys, they stood on their own. The lawman back out there, you're by yourself out in there. He would take me a few times as I was grown, and he would ask me to go with him to go do something. And here I am, not a lawman, but I would ride out to deal with something. And I remember one time we pulled up at this farmhouse way out in the backwoods. I don't even have found it. I mean, we're taking oil roads, then went to gravel roads, then went to dirt roads. Now that's the lawman, that environment at the time. And then we picked up a 2-lane track that took us around it through some woods up onto a creek bottom. And we pulled right out there, and here's this house sitting out here in the middle of nowhere. It's 10 o'clock at night, not a light anywhere. It was a cloudy night. The only light was my granddad's flashlight. And that's when it hit me. He's on his own out here. Yeah. He whatever he tangles with, that's the tough old men I was telling you about. Whatever he tangles with, he has to deal with it. And then it occurred to me, well, if he has to deal with that and somebody starts shooting, then I'm tangled up in the middle of this too, and I'm in it, and we have no way to get any. How would you tell somebody how to find that house out in the middle of nowhere? You can't do it. Back in the day, you couldn't. We had GPS now. I doubt that house was even on GPS. So that's my books are all about lawmen. I I value all the law enforcement officers in this country. I back them up 120%. Those are the people that are here to take care of us, to keep us safe. And those are the people that I like to write about in the Rock Hole.
What a perfect note to finish our interview on for BookTrib on Facebook Live. Reavis, this is just such a wonderful book. I enjoy all your books. And this is also, just to finish, this is your first book with Source, right? Source Books?
Source Books. Yeah, I started Poison Pen Press and Source Book. They merged with Source Books.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So it's more Poison Pen Press, Barbara Peters, and
yeah, Barbara published it, but Source Books absorbed it, and so now it's an imprint under Source Books, and this is the first book that's released under them since I became part of that family. I've got another book coming out in January, which is Laying Bones, and Laying Bones is the next book in the series. It's the most recent book, and
is that Grandpa Ned also?
It is Tom Bell, Grandpa Ned, and
okay.
It's up on the Red River. People don't know that everybody thinks the Red River is the border between Texas and Oklahoma. So if you go across here in Oklahoma, if you're on this side, you're in Texas. No, that river moves, and there's orphan slivers of Oklahoma on the Texas side, but Oklahoma can't get to them. And so this book is set in 1969, and one of my what ifs. What if this little piece of land is Oklahoma land, and these gangsters come in and they build a gambling casino, honky tonk, in Texas, but it's on Oklahoma land.
Huh.
Texas says, we're not enforcing that. That's Oklahoma, because Oklahoma says, I can't get there to Texas because there's no roads. So now you've got a little dilemma. What if somebody did that? And Ned Parker's going to have to deal with it, and Ned and Tom Bell deal with it in their own way, alongside John Washington, who's an almost mythical black deputy sheriff that works hand in hand with all these folks. And I think this one's a riot. And this one's actually based on a true story. So it's got a lot of truth in it.
You know, that reminds me of the great Stephen Hunter book, Hot Springs, where he puts together a whole group of, the hero puts together, one of the swaggers, a whole group of old gunmen.
I love that book.
You and I have exactly the same taste in literature, which is not, and anyone who picks up The Rock Hole, truly, it is a wonderful book. The book is The Rock Hole. The author is Reavis Wortham. I'm Jon Land for BookTrib on Facebook, and over where I am right now, believe it or not, it's snowing in Rhode Island, so it's a perfect weekend to read a great book. Goodbye for now, and happy reading.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it.
A pleasure, Reavis. See you soon.
I'm looking forward to it.
All right.